having this conversation so frequently with teenagers, high school students, college students, parents, um, about the struggle of just the wearing on of this whole pandemic and the reaction to it and the impact on your lifestyle and all this stuff. And so decided I'm just going to make this video and try to speak to you so you can hear from a certain perspective from someone on the outside who's having countless conversations about this stuff, so you can get a sense of what I'm observing as normal right now. And hopefully this will be helpful and will put you at ease a little bit. So one thing you have to understand is in the work that I do, and if you're a client of mine and you happen to be seeing this, you already have heard this from me before. But one of the ways that I look at the world is I go, there are certain character traits that just given the Western world, the pace of life, the values that we have, the way people interact, it just makes it a lot easier to live in this world. If you're an extrovert, like you really like being around people, you draw energy from being around people, it's just easier to live in this world. If you're outgoing, so it's like easy for you to approach people, far easier to live in this world. If you are a more kind of casual, easygoing person who just sort of lets things slide off their shoulders, like something happens, you kind of shrug your shoulders and go, okay, whatever, and move on, easier to live in this world. If academics come easier for you, especially if you're a student, it's just so much easier than to be one of these people who's constantly looking at everybody else who's getting better grades, or they can get it done in 10 minutes and it takes you 2 hours. If you're a person who's just sort of on a more conventional path, like I just want to go to school, go to college, join whatever, Greek life or whatever, get a job working in the banking finance world, whatever kind of conventional kind of career, it's just easier to live in this world. There's so many more opportunities, paths are available to you. If your interests are more mainstream, and it's, another one that's a little bit more subtle, is if you're a person who's just very comfortable with competition. Because there's a lot of competition in the world. And if you're comfortable with it or you even enjoy it, it's just easier to live in this world. Now, go to the other side of the list, and everything that's the opposite of that makes it harder to live in this world. And you could have one or two of these traits on this other side, and you'll find that it's hard to live in this world. Like if you're an introvert and you need more quiet, you prefer to have a few close friends, but everybody around you is going to like large gatherings. And so every time you want to socialize or meet new people, you have to do it where there's a lot of turmoil and chaos and people talking and loud music and stuff. It's harder to live in this world. If your person is just more timid, it's just not easy for you to approach strangers. It's harder to live in this world. If you're more intense, you feel things more intense, you're thinking about things, the things you care about are more intense, more challenging. If you're more sensitive, if you are more sensitive in any way imaginable, emotionally more sensitive, you're more sensitive to smells, taste, touch, all that kind of stuff, hard to live in this world. If you're a person who tends to think a lot, question lots of things, especially if you're an overthinker, like a lot of the people I work with tend to be overthinkers, more challenging. If you're a seeker who's asking questions and really challenging cultural norms and really trying to find a deeper meaning to your life or figure out a path for yourself that's going to have like a deeper level of satisfaction to it. If your interests are more outlier interests, if you're a person whose school is hard, if I already mentioned that particular one, and if your person doesn't really enjoy competition or find competition hard, like you can have like 9 things on the easy column and 1 on the challenging time. It is just harder to live in this world being you, and especially if people don't necessarily know these things about you, because you present this image to the world like it's really easy for you, but the truth is it's just harder on the inside. And because so many people I work with have qualities on that harder side of it, like I really get this and I'm really more sensitive to the challenge that you go through. So here's the patterns that I've observed since this whole COVID thing started back in the beginning of 2020. Okay. Number one thing is people have regressed. Progress that they were making, success habits they built in place for themselves just began to weaken or even crumble. And it shows up in a number of different ways. These are probably the most common ones I'm finding amongst people who are older or teenagers, which is really who I'm sort of speaking to with this. Okay. One is that your academic discipline is just not what it was. Whereas before, whether you liked school or not, you had good study habits, you could, compartmentalize your social life, not get lost in Netflix, whatever, you could just get things done. Now all of a sudden, academics are becoming harder to do. And for a lot of people, it's showing up in grades that they're not used to getting, that have just really gone down. For some people, it's health and fitness that's really declined, where they were much more physically fit, much more active, especially if you're like on a sports team or whatever, where there was like built-in practices. And now all of a sudden you find yourself being more lethargic or just doing a lot of comfort food eating. It's a regression that's happened. For some people, it's social confidence, where you were finally just getting in this groove where you began to feel more sure of yourself, more confident in your ability to kind of stand up in the world and go out and address people or meet new people, whatever. And now all of a sudden, all those opportunities have been taken away from you, and your confidence is suddenly struggling at this point. Emotional maturity is another one where hear lots of stories about people having like little hissy fits like they had as a toddler. Things that would normally not bother them, all of a sudden they're getting really upset by. Going to their parents going, I'm so depressed, I'm such a loser, or whatever it is, or like fits of anger is another one that I hear a lot of, just temper tantrums, because you're not able to sustain the emotional maturity that you really are capable of, but it's been really hard to sustain it during this particular time. And one other was a little bit more ubiquitous is just flexibility, where when you were, in a groove, in a better place in your life, you found yourself sort of more adaptive, easier to move on from things that were setbacks, whatever, more willing to try new things. And now all of a sudden it's become harder to get yourself to do that stuff. So if you have any of these things, okay, understand it's just regression. It doesn't mean that you've forgotten the other things you've learned. It's just you've kind of gone backwards, okay? If you have more than one of these, it's even more challenging right now. And there's a lot of people out there in the world, who have all of these things going on for them right now, okay? So people have regressed, and if you've experienced these things, it's normal, and you're okay. Here's the other thing that's going on is there is just madness in the world right now, okay? There is madness that shows up in so many different ways where, you want to be able to, especially like when you're a kid, you grow up and you kind of want to look to your parents that they've got their act together and, no matter what's going on out there, like they can take care of you or whatever. Well, there's just a lot of madness in the world right now, and it shows up in these multiple different ways, okay? So one of them is, the obvious, is that there's just political madness happening right now. There is this tribalism, there is this aggressiveness, this really in so many ways almost like this contempt that people have towards one another who have different political views. There's dishonesty, corruption at like levels that are just, almost too amazing to believe or whatever. And while you yourself may just be at the age where you can vote, or some people may not even at that age yet or whatever, it's really disconcerting to live in a world where the power structure that's supposed to be holding things together right now is giving you a sense of instability and unreliability, okay? There's a lot of financial stress happening, and if it's not happening in your particular family with your parents, it's happening in the community around you, and you see it showing up in people's behaviors, right? So, people who maybe ordinarily would let somebody cut in front of them in a grocery store and just kind of shrug their shoulders are now like, having fits or whatever, okay? Or maybe you're seeing your parents feeling a lot more stress around their own personal finances because of concern of what's happening in the market or what's happening with their jobs, or trying to stay healthy so that they can keep going to their jobs or whatever. And it's just hard because being around people who are stressed is stressful, right? And there's a lot of social discord going on in the world. I mentioned about the political, these like battling political views that people have, but it's also, kind of showing up in this like, people, being pushing each other away or being very righteous and judgmental of others, whatever. It's just a lot of it going on right now, and it's hard not to be affected by this stuff, okay? So if you feel yourself just going like, the world doesn't feel stable to me right now, it's like really kind of I'm uncertain about things. Well, it's because there's uncertainty in the world, and there's uncertainty in your personal lives also. You're going like, okay, we can go to school, but it's only for a couple of days a week, and it's only for a few hours. And if the numbers get really high, they may shut down school again or whatever. Or maybe there's uncertainty about, will I even be able to go to school? I'm talking to like college students who were so excited to go back to school, or if you're a college freshman to go off to school, and all of a sudden, your school didn't open. And so here you are at 18 years old, and you're sitting in your parents' home. And it's really hard, okay? And it's hard not knowing what's going to happen. It would be almost easier if they just said, we're not opening school for this year, so you can make other plans, right? But you don't know. So there's just a lot of uncertainty in the world right now. And what this does is it puts people in survival mode, okay? So you have this sympathetic nervous system, okay? And when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, you're in fight flight mode, okay? And fight flight mode has a number of common characteristics to it. Right? Your heart rate will go up. You're not going to sleep as well. Digestive issues, stress, headaches can come. A lot of very kind of dark thoughts, sometimes really dark thoughts that will come out of this time. Um, a lot of just being like much more reactive, like in a way that's almost disappointing to yourself to have this sort of reactiveness. And this is stuff that happens when you're living your life in survival mode, right? So the ideal thing in your life is that you're not operating in survival mode, that you're operating primarily with your parasympathetic nervous system that's driving force. So your heart rate is stable, your immune system is strong. You can absorb life's speed bumps or whatever, obstacles that come your way or whatever. You're much more kind of even keel. You're much more chill, right? But if you find yourself these days being much more on edge, having much more kind of extreme thoughts, or trouble sleeping, or finding yourself like diving into some like kind of perverse behaviors or whatever that you're not proud of or whatever, it's actually normal. And it's a normal thing when people are in such kind of stress mode for so much. And it's really hard not to be comparing. It's always hard when you're a teenager, okay? But it's even harder now, right? So you'll compare because you'll see other people are in school and have a much more normal life, and you're not. You're sitting at home. Or you look at their Instagram because they actually have some friends and they're out doing stuff together. And of course, Instagram people choose the way they want to project the image, or their Snapchat story, and they look like they're out doing stuff and you're not. And it looks like people are having more fun than you are, and you can be jealous of that and get down on yourself about it. Look at this time and go, people who really already have established friend groups probably in many ways have an easier time right now, because once you get over the initial, worries of extreme, things are going to happen if you get the virus right away, it's probably more likely that they're getting together with people and they have a small group and they have rules they're playing by and they're whatever. But if you're at that point where you're just beginning to develop that friend group, or you're still developing it, it's really hard because you see what they have that you don't have yet. That if life was more normal, if you could just be going to practices, having school, having the spontaneous moments that happen when you carpool or whatever, you probably would be at the point of having more of those friend groups, but you don't. And it's really hard not to be frustrated with that and comparing yourself to other people, right? So comparing is normal. It's harder in a way now not to compare, because you're not just comparing what you're seeing other people, at least perceiving the way they're presenting themselves, but you're comparing to what you thought it should be, okay? And that is always, this is, one of the things I constantly talk about. That's always one of the like biggest pitfalls, is when you go, but it should be different than this, okay? So let me offer you a few thoughts. It's so hard to do this and not sound cliche, but I'm going to do it anyway, on why you shouldn't compare, okay? You shouldn't be comparing with people, because your life, your social life, your knowing yourself and understanding yourself and making decisions for yourself and moving your life forward and getting out of the house and getting on with your adult life and all that stuff, it's still developing. It's not that it has stopped. It's just going slower than you wanted, and it's going in a way that's different than you wanted. But it doesn't mean that it's not still happening. And the evidence of this is, I can prove this because you've already been there. You're old enough at this point to be able to look back at times in your life where you thought things were really awful, where you felt like, failure was imminent, or there wasn't much hope or whatever. And now you can look back on it and go, you know what, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Maybe you've even gotten to the point where you look back and you go, I can actually see how that kind of fits into helping me get to the good stuff that I've gotten to now. So you have to understand, your life has not stopped. It's still developing. It's just going slower and different than you wanted. You're still making progress. The fact that you're watching this video, you're still making progress, okay? Another thing you should not be comparing is, you have to understand, if you're struggling with school right now, it's just easier to focus when you're in school for most people, and especially if you're an athlete or you have other extracurriculars, when you're busy with those things. It's a well-researched, well-documented fact, especially with boys, by the way, that they do better academically when they're in the midst of their sports season. It's like having practice to go to, having your time be much more precious, much more, when you get your free time or whatever, it's sort of much more valuable to you. So when all of a sudden you don't have that structure of a teacher standing in front of a room who's going to call you out on the fact that you're, looking at your phone or whatever, where you have kind of an outside world that's providing structure for you and like forcing you to have to stay focused. It is harder for most people to stay focused. Now, there are exceptions to this, and you may be one of them who loves this online learning thing or whatever. But for a lot of people, it's just harder. So if you're not doing as well academically, all of a sudden you're getting bad grades for the first time in your life, you're still okay. It's just hard to do it during this time, okay? There's also not enough dopamine, okay? This is the pleasure hormone, right? The stuff that just that makes you feel good. These like hits of things that come when you're just spontaneously laughing with people, or for some people like who love watching sports, when all of a sudden there was months where you couldn't watch sports, and that stuff that you get like a rush from. And when there's not enough dopamine, when you're not getting enough like stuff that just makes you feel pleasure in your life, you actually start to feel depressed. This is the interesting thing: is you have too much dopamine, too much stuff that feels good, you become addicted. This is like the video game thing, okay? Or the vape pen that people are hitting all the time, right? You start to become addicted. It's too much. But too little, people get depressed. And when they get depressed, then what happens is they don't do as well, they're not as focused, they're not sleeping as well, they have digestive issues, and the whole problem cycles on itself, okay? So this is why you cannot get lost in comparison. You have to understand you're doing the best you can do right now, given a really hard time, okay? So here's what you want to do. You want to limit the amount of regression in your life. You may not be able to like go out there and, kick ass in the world the way that you're used to. You may have to be able to go out there and like get together with 15 people, make plans, get a bunch of people to go out to the beach or whatever. But you can limit how far down you go, okay? You can just realize like, okay, it's tough, but it's not as bad as I'm psyching myself out to believe, okay? Part of that comes from being more disciplined in your life, like forcing yourself to get outdoors in the sunlight, forcing yourself to get up and do exercise, forcing yourself to continue to reach out to people, even if they're hard to connect with, to make whatever social plans you can make, okay? To be disciplined, to like study and do your schoolwork, even though it's harder to do it. Discipline will make the difference in your life, okay? People who rely on motivation can be waiting a long time for them to feel motivated. People who know how to do discipline are positioned to be successful no matter what's going on, because they can get themselves to do it even when they don't feel like it, okay? And you have to keep perspective in all this, okay? A friend of mine said to me, and I love this, he's like, this whole situation sucks, and I agree. The whole situation really sucks on so many levels for so many people. And it's like impossible to not be affected by it, right? And he goes, but you got to remember, we are the descendants of survivors. Like, we are the descendants of the humans who lived through earthquakes, droughts, famines, nuclear accidents, wars, awful wars that have gone on, plagues, the Black Plague that killed like 1 out of 3 people in Europe. Okay, 1 out of 3. We're looking at a virus that's killing about 1 to 3% depending on your age. Okay, this is 1 out of 3 people. And we are the descendants of those survivors, right? Because you just got to keep that in perspective. And I always come back to that. Like when things are really bad, I go, this sucks and it's actually okay. Like we're going to get through this. It's going through it at a time when we have, science and medicine and advances and things we can do to protect ourselves that people back then didn't know how to do, right? You got to keep perspective that while this is hard, it's not the end of the world and it's going to get better. And you have to keep a sense of humor, okay? I say this to people who work with me, really get this, and it because for most people who work with me, I know where the buttons are to push to get them to laugh and stuff. But I always say this: if I didn't have a sense of humor, I'd go insane. That was true before this whole pandemic happened. It's even more so now. And so, like adding in like things in your life that bring out joy, make you laugh a little bit. Surrounding yourself with people who are positive, people who are healthy, people who are like exercising, getting outdoors, doing stuff, not being around the whiners who want to, complain about how bad the world is. Okay. These are things that are really make a difference. It's be disciplined. It's keep perspective, surround yourself with good people, keep a sense of humor in your life, be compassionate, and realize that when all is said and done, this too shall pass. This is not going to be your demise. It's going to become part of the story that you're going to one day tell. Like my grandparents used to talk to me about what it was like living through the Depression years and struggling to find food every single day. You're probably not struggling to find food every day. This too shall pass. And you have to remember that you got to keep going because the best is yet to come. One of the things I can't stand that people say oftentimes to to teenagers, they'll talk about like, oh, high school, best years of your life, college, best years of life. I'm like, screw that. It's just not true. For some people, it's great. For others, it's okay. For some people, it sucks, right? But even if it's great for you, you don't want this to be the best years of your life. You know why? Because what it means is when they're over, it's all downhill. No, you want to just be, this is a stage in your life, and then you're on to the next one, and the best is yet to come. The best friend you're going to make in your life, probably the person you're going to marry you haven't met yet, the career success, the breakthroughs of discovery, and all the like really cool adventures you're going to have in your life, they're in the future. They haven't happened yet, and they're going to. All right. So I hope this is helpful to you. All right. Just thought it was useful to send some message out to just get you to understand and remember, like, yes, it's a tough time. If you're going through the stress, the emotional stuff, if your school has been harder for you, it's not you. You're okay. It's normal. Pull together, stay composed, believe that the best is yet to come. All right. Hope this is helpful to you.